Anybody want to share?
Person who keeps asking for forgiveness will then finally shut up.
Okay, to shut up the other person. Okay, that could be a reason to forgive. Again, this isn't necessarily, we're not looking for lofty ideals just yet. Yeah?
It possibly restores a meaningful relationship, and therefore it re-enhances one's
okay, so for one of the reasons, one of the aspects of forgiveness, it's useful for the relationship, or restoring the relationship, or attempt to fix a relationship. Anyone else have something different? Yeah?
I think there are different levels to it.
Okay, well that, 100%.
I think that, like there's a very simplistic thing, like somebody calls me ugly and then comes to me and says, I'm really sorry about that, didn't mean to hurt your feelings. That's one level, but then there's another level where trust is broken, and that becomes a lot more difficult to forgive once the trust is broken.
All right, so but let's finish the sentence. Forgiving is important because shut the person up, restore a relationship. What else?
They can.
Huh?
They can.
Okay, yes they can.
The ability to move on.
Ability to move on.
To learn.
To learn. These are all very utilitarian. They're not wrong. They're just utilitarian. Text number 8 presents this idea of forgiveness, or forgiveness as the chaos in an air traffic control room. All right, picture the crowded screen in front of a harried air traffic controller. Picture the chaos in the room and the jumble of planes on the screen. Now imagine your unresolved grievances are the planes on that screen have been circling for days and weeks on end. Most of the other planes have landed, but your unresolved grievances continue to take up precious airspace, draining resources that may be needed in an emergency. Having them on the screen forces you to work harder and increase the chance for accidents. Grievance planes become a source of stress, and burnout is often the result. So forgiveness is the peace you learn to feel when you allow the circling planes to land. Forgiveness is for you and not for the offended. Forgiveness is taking back your power. Forgiveness is taking responsibility for how you feel. Forgiveness is about your healing and not about the people who hurt you. Forgiveness is a trainable skill, just like learning to throw a baseball. Forgiveness helps you to get control over your feelings. Forgiveness can improve your mental, physical health. Forgiveness is becoming a hero instead of a victim. Forgiveness is a choice. Everyone can learn to forgive. All right, so this is...
You could say the same thing about revenge, though.
Okay, that's a different course.
Yeah, that's good.
But interestingly, look at text number 9. Judaism's understanding of forgiveness is very much informed by revenge. Right? It says, you shall neither take revenge nor bear a grudge against the members of your people. How can this be? Right? Look at that. If someone does something wrong for you, how can you sort of not hold a grudge? So consider this example. While cutting meat, a person accidentally cut his hand, would he retaliate and cut the hand that was holding the knife? This is a classic Jewish example that is given when talking about the interconnectedness of people, of the Jewish people in a spiritual sense. The idea of we're connected. So forgiving the other person is on some level connected to me. Not forgiving the other person is bad for me. What does it help for me to hold a grudge? So it's true. You could say the same thing about revenge as you do about forgiveness. And Judaism does just that. Both are bad because of what it says about me.
So is forgiving synonymous with letting go of resentment? Are they?
No, I don't. I think absolutely not. From a Jewish point of view, no. But there's recognizing the fact that we are connected, and so how we relate to the other. Holding the grudge against the other is not good because on some level, that all I'm doing is injuring myself. Now, literally, the resentment can exist, but if I go literally, so you do something wrong to me, I might resent it. But on a spiritual level, what does that accomplish? So the idea, Judaism recognizing this idea of atonement and granting this level of pardon as something of, on some level as, well, if we are all this level of interconnectedness, then what does it help for me to bear a grudge against him if he is me? Some level what we're looking at is the conflicts are between me and me. Yelling at him is yelling at me. Now, but that's not on the practical level. That's not on the bullhorn level. You shouldn't do that. Try. But there's something on the practical level. Resentment may be there, and animosity may remain, and this sort of forgiveness may lead to a very cold and fragile peace. But on the spiritual level, if we're talking about what is this, cutting to the heart of the matter in terms of mechilah, it's supposed to cause us to recognize this interconnectedness. We don't justify the harm that's done, but we're open to accepting the person back into our lives. Why? Because we are connected to that person. And we think back to the levels and the stages. That all still exists. But at the core, the reason why we have to be open towards the concept of mechilah, of forgiveness, is because of the way we are connected to each and every person at the core. And so maybe it's about sort of suffering in silence or bearing the grudge, but we bear the grudge on we keep those feelings to ourselves. But we're open to accepting the person back into our lives. It's not only that about restoring the relationship with others, but from the looking at how we see ourselves. Is this fair? Getting back to what we said before, I'm the sucker here. If I have to forgive you for what you did to me, since you took the step forward to ask for forgiveness and I have to grant it, you get everything and I just basically have to suck it up and bury my deep-seated resentment? No. That's the idea. You need to shift the understanding of on which levels we are forgiven. Now, it could be that there's a utilitarian reason to forgive for all the reasons that the guy mentioned. And just, you can take revenge for the same reasons. But Judaism sees the fact that the person is commanded to take the offender is commanded to take the first move. And having the legitimate opportunity not to forgive, these are all some of the details which frame our responsibility, our opportunity, our baseline concept of mechilah, forgiveness. And if it sounds a little bit complicated, well, anything that relates to matters of the spirit generally is. The idea that if we look at every single person in this room as ultimately being connected, then on some level, I can't hold a grudge against anybody because they're just harmful to me. That's on the spiritual level. On the physical level, I hate everyone. That's it. It's like the holiday of Festivus. We have the airing of grievances. It's just another Seinfeld reference. But on a deeper spiritual level, which is the realm which as Jews we are supposed to connect with at times, it's not just about the utilitarian relationship between people where there's some type of forgiveness and maybe some type of a grudge, but Judaism sees if there's an offense, a person has a responsibility to ask for pardon. I should be forgiving. I don't always have to be forgiving. On a spiritual level, the goal is to have this recognition of the fact that there's this common spiritual ground that should guide us forward. The more we're in touch with that spiritual foundation, it could be that we'll be more forgiving. I don't know. It seems, Dalai Lama seems to be pretty forgiving. He's a very spiritual person. I don't know. Maybe there's some sort of comparable Jewish ideal as well. Did you have something?
Yeah. So in the Chabad version of Tachman and Vidui, every day we say, Shanu Baganu Zalnu. We have transgressed, we have sinned, we have robbed, we have scoffed.
Right.
And that, I never really figured out why. That's missing from the, they don't do that in the Art Scroll version.
No, it's there. But first remember, that's confession of our sins.
But
against God.
But it's, every individual says that as part of the group. We have sinned, we have lied, we have robbed, even though you yourself may not have robbed.
Right.
And I always found that it puts things in perspective because number one, you take upon yourself the behavior of the group, and then you begin to ask yourself, have I robbed? Well, maybe I haven't physically robbed somebody.
That's a very good utilitarian reason for why we do that. I look at that, I'm like, wait a second, Yom Kippur, which is I'm supposed to be asking God for forgiveness. Not once do I ask God for forgiveness, because the entire Yom Kippur is in the plural. And so certainly there's it should force me to think about, well, if I'm admitting it, did I actually commit it? And even if the answer is no, it's based upon the same theme. Because ultimately, if I commit something, since we are connected, then my sins are also your sins. And your sins are also my sins, so that's the we. The other direction I thought you were going in, and this is going to get us to sort of an expression of this spiritual connection in atonement that was referred to before in terms of the Shema, the bedtime Shema, is the idea that there seems to be, we Jews have always sort of viewed it as a supreme value to be forgiven. Could be because we screw up so often and we ask God to forgive us, and that's an expression that emerges in the idea of God, Hashem, Hashem, El Rachum V'Chanun, God, you are so merciful and compassionate, which is usually a response to our misdeeds. But look at text number 11. Rabbi Nechonyah ben Hakana was asked by his disciples on page 66, by what virtue have you reached such old age? He replied, never have I sought respect through degradation of my fellow, nor have I ever gone to bed harboring animosity towards another. And I've been generous with my money. Talmud explains these virtues. I have not sought respect through degradation of my fellow. This is illustrated by Rav Huna, once carrying a spade on his shoulder, and Chana bar Chanai wanted to carry it for him. Rav Huna said to him, if you're accustomed to carry such items in your own town, take it. If not, I do not want to be paid respect for your degradation. Nor have I ever gone to bed harboring animosity towards another. This was illustrated by Mar Zutra, who when climbed into bed would say, I forgive all who have vexed me. And in fact, this is something that has become part of the bedtime Schmuck. For those who say the long version. There's a nice long, you think that you're done with your prayers. In some of the prayer books, there's like a 4-page version before the bedtime Schmuck. Some people think it was instituted to put you to sleep.
Oh, yeah.
But so here we're saying being proactive in forgiving. Right? We had always talked about before. We had always spoken about before, you need to be proactive in asking for forgiveness. Here we're saying, no, you have to be proactive in forgiving. How do we understand that? It seems foreign from everything we introduced in the very beginning. Maybe it's a little sort of Christian influence, turning the other cheek. Could be.
Really?
I don't know, the thought crossed my mind, maybe we've gone soft a little bit, in terms of people aren't coming forward enough to ask for forgiveness, so we've sort of, okay, you know what, let's just make it easier for the other person. Yeah?
Is it just about like approaching the forgiveness process of like wanting to forgive someone, not meaning that you do easily in every case, like you can still use the exceptions and things, but that you should want to forgive other people? Well,
I think that there's certainly this idea that you should want, especially in lieu of what we said before, of this sort of spiritual forgiveness, the idea that my not forgiving is really just hurting me, well then I should want to forgive. It's sort of this sentiment of Nechonyah ben Hakana, this sentiment which is expressed in the bedtime Shema, goes beyond the letter of the law. It's not about the technical responsibility of the person who makes a mistake to ask for forgiveness, nor is it governed by the rules of forgiving where there are certain exceptions. But you know what? Be forgiving. Not be a pushover, not be just someone who just sort of, yeah, whatever you do to me is fine, but recognizing this comes from a deep-seated spiritual value of in the world, in the spiritual world, which Jews believe is the genuine world, right? We give the example often that we are not people. We're not people with spiritual experiences. We're souls with physical experiences. That ultimately, I should be in touch with the need to try and create this harmony, which will come from my forgiving. And in the morning, I can still wake up angry at you. But on a spiritual level, to be forthcoming in this level of forgiveness is something that is important. There's another expression, sort of interesting that why do you think this became part of the don't go to bed without forgiving? Why before going to sleep?
Sleep.
Yeah.
You don't know if you're gonna wake up the next day.
Okay. Yeah, that's very pessimistic, but probably true. Maybe you want to resolve everything. You want to you want to close all of the loopholes. In fact, this sentiment is very much expressed in one of the Yom Kippur prayers. Yom Kippur begins with the Kol Nidre service. There's something called the Tefillah Zakah. It's in the Yom Kippur prayer books, the Machzor books, before Kol Nidre. And in it has a declaration that I forgive all those who have wronged me. Whatever they have done, I forgive them. And we want to get that out of the way. Some usually explain it as we want to get that out of the way before we ask God to forgive us. We show God that we have forgiven other people. But it's on a deeper level, it's just promoting this recognition of the spiritual interconnectedness that we're trying to get in touch with the higher reason for forgiveness. Interestingly enough, that statement says, I forgive those who have sinned me, whether it be my body or whether it be my reputation, unless they owe me money. And that I don't forgive. Jews. But there too is this element of resolution. So we have the recognition of the fact that the offender needs to try and appease, and the victim ought to forgive. Each can go beyond the letter of the law. The offender was obligated to go how many times? 3. But is encouraged to try and continue to ask until resolved. The victim doesn't have to forgive, but there's this element of unilaterally forgiving when being in touch with the more spiritual component. There is, because at the end of the story that we read at the beginning is text number 13, page 69. If someone will please read. Okay.
Immediately, Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon, entered the study hall and expounded. A person should always be gentle as a reed and never be unyielding as a cedar. Hence, the reed merited to be used to write the Torah, tefillin, and mezuzot.
Yeah. So this is after Rabbi Elazar was granted forgiveness, right? The person he called ugly said, I'll forgive him for your sake, type of a thing, as long as he doesn't do it again. The postscript is that Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon, had a teaching. A person should be as gentle as a reed and never be unyielding as a cedar. And the reed, because of its flexibility, was rewarded with the ability to be the source of Torah, tefillin, and mezuzot, which have within them important basically Judaism. Tefillin and the mezuzot have the Shema. Torah is, of course, Torah. Being gentle may seem like a weakness. Seeking or granting forgiveness may seem like a capitulation. Why should I ask you for forgiveness? Or the person who, as we saw time and again, the person who grants forgiveness would seem to be like, be the sucker in all of this. But there's a midrash which seems to provide unique insight. Text 14, God said, when I am triumphant, I lose, and when I am triumphed over, I gain. I was triumphant over the generation of the flood, but didn't I lose? For I destroyed my world, as it states, and the flood blotted out all that there was. The same was true concerning the generation of dispersion, the city of Sodom. However, in the days of Moses, I was triumphed over, but I gained in that I did not destroy Israel. That is the meaning of the introduction to the psalm Laminatseach, which literally means to the choir master. You can let it be read as Laminatseach, to he who desires to be triumphed over. The idea that the idea of stepping back is viewed as a significant victory, as opposed to it being viewed as weakness. The idea of stepping back can be something very significant. Jewish tradition has numerous teachings on this source. The idea that where is God to be found? Not in the lightning, not in the thunder, not in the noise, but in the still, small voice. Kol demama daka. Or the idea, the Kabbalistic idea that how did God create the world? It's called tzimtzum, some sort of stepping back. So if God fills everything, then where is there room for us? So on some level, God had to step back to allow for our creation. Now, this doesn't mean that God doesn't like to make a big, bold statement sometimes. You probably know we read the Torah portion of Sinai, where there was lots of noise and lots of thunder and lightning. But the idea emerges that this concept of stepping back for a moment and not viewing it as sort of a winner-take-all, but God Himself appreciated those opportunities where it wasn't about Him getting His way, but for the Jewish people to be victorious, and that's what it's referring to as the situation within the golden calf. God wanted to destroy the Jewish people. Moses asked for forgiveness. God said, "Okay, I'll listen." If you look at, there's another famous Talmudic tradition of this taking place. There is a famous dispute, getting a little bit off topic, but to sort of bring a little more color and texture to this last source. There's a famous Talmudic dispute which was described about an oven. It's called the Tanur Shel Achnai. So about a particular oven, whether it was something that could become pure, could become impure or not. It was a dispute over ritual impurity, which is not really relevant the same way today as it was back then. But all of the rabbis said one way, and one rabbi, Rabbi Eliezer, said the other. And in Judaism, in Talmudic Judaism, who do we follow? The majority. We follow the rabbis. So basically, they were going to follow the majority opinion. But Rabbi Eliezer said, "I'm right, and I can prove to you that I'm right." How? Are you familiar with the story? I can prove to you I'm right because the river will flow upstream, or the walls will shake, or the voice will come from heaven. All of these things happened, proving Rabbi Eliezer being right. And then one of the rabbis got him and said, "No, it doesn't matter because the Torah is not in heaven. We follow the majority." And they followed the majority. Rabbi Eliezer was censured and he was excommunicated because he was the minority. And the Talmud says that when this was taking place, so imagine the scene. Rabbi Eliezer said one thing. A heavenly voice agrees with Rabbi Eliezer, which basically means God agrees with Rabbi Eliezer. And someone gets up and says, "No, God, you're wrong, because we're following the majority." That's how Judaism works. So the story of the Talmud continues that at that moment, Eliyahu Hanavi, sort of like is the on-field reporter, says to God, "What are you thinking, God? How does this make you feel that your children are ignoring all of your wonders and your voice?" And the Talmud says, God sort of sits back and smiles, very anthropomorphic, and points to Maimonides. We may be heretics. I may be a heretic for presenting it this way, but he says, "Nitzchuni banai, my children have been victorious over me." Right? Sort of, God's shepping a lot of nachas that his children had taken his teachings to prove God wrong. All right. Now, the story has a lot of other meaning, but the idea of recognizing that it's not always, you don't always have to be right. And there's something to be said for not being right. Someone calls you ugly, well, you forgive him anyway, because taking that on some level is taking the high road. So when it comes to this element of forgiveness, and what we basically have seen is that it's on several different levels. There's the human level, where people should make up for their mistakes and people should be forgiving, and sometimes you shouldn't be forgiving because the offense is so great. But on a spiritual level, there's something to be said for recognizing how we are all connected, and because of that connection, this concept of forgiveness becomes something so automatic, or so essential. It's not automatic, and therefore, if you enjoyed this lesson, great. If not, please forgive me.
What's schlepping nachas? What's that expression?
Shepping nachas, getting pride. Taking pride in his, yes. Shepping. No, schlepping is when you carry something. Shepping is when you take something.
Okay, so it's not only...
All right, so we will, please God, be continuing next week. And we will move on to the fair share ethics of charity. David, thanks for being cameraman.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Turn it off now.